All right. What's up, fellas? Time for Thursday afternoon. Wake Up Mintzy, presented by Dude Wipes. Drinking some Stella Blue in the office. We got some beautiful Chicago weather, but I'll tell you what I'm more excited about. We got Todd Fuhrman on here. We're about to talk some damn college football because the season is right around the corner. We're hitting August. Look, the old saying, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. As far as being a sports gambler, I'm a big believer in that your college football bets are won in August, analyzing the transfer portal and all the coaching moves. What's up, Todd? How are you?
It's always good to talk a little ball, Mintzy, although being a Chicago native that you are these days, it's all Bears all the time. I feel like it's impossible to get college football coverage unless you're reaching out to your sources across the South and everywhere else in the country.
That's true. I will say, though, Chicago, a lot of these Big Ten schools, you got a lot of young post-college people here. It's kind of a melting pot just because it's such a big city. But, yeah, the Bears talk right now, especially with Ben Johnson running a tight ship in camp, certainly dominating the local airways. But I'll say this is the first time I've been optimistic about the Bears in a while. Every year there's always, like, the fans drink the Kool-Aid. It's like the same cycle, like this is the year. But they actually fixed their O-line, and I think Ben Johnson's a good coach. So I actually think they might have some optimism.
I mean, the longer you stay in Chicago, though, it's the ebbs and flows. It doesn't matter who the Bears have under center. Doesn't matter what they have in the way of weapons or what they have on the defensive side of the ball. Hope springs eternal until, of course, the Bears lose a divisional game week 1 against the Vikings, and everybody tries to figure out what direction they need to go to try and stabilize that quarterback position if Caleb Williams isn't the ultimate answer to kind of be the heir apparent, I guess, to Jim McMahon going all the way back to the mid-'80s.
Yeah, they've never had a 4,000-yard passer. That's a wild stat. I'll tell you what else real quick in Chicago. 1 hour left on the trade deadline. A lot of Cubs fans wanting to see something. They traded for a reliever. They might get Sandy Alcantara from the Marlins. But, you know, there's a lot of anxious Cubs fans around here right now wanting them to do something.
Trust me, buddy. All my boys growing up, all diehard Cub fans, they are going off in the group text chain today asking if Jed Hoyer's even in the office. But I feel I have to go to bat for Jed. I mean, we share an alma mater. And look, anytime I get a prominent Wesleyan alum, whether it's Bill Belichick as the head coach of North Carolina or Jed being the boss of the Cubs, you know, I got to defend those guys. Although you have to imagine that Cub fans weren't exactly thrilled with the way they performed in the most recent series against the Brewers and everything in front of them, as it looks like the National League completely wide open unless the Dodgers can solidify that bullpen and some of their starting pitching as well.
All right, let's get into college football. That's enough of that. We'll react to the trade deadline at the end of this. Tyler Moody has a lot of thoughts on it. All right, bunch of stuff to get into. As always, checking the DraftKings odds. I mean, NFL Hall of Fame game tonight. You're not much of a preseason bettor, are you? I had like one quick thought.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll take my shots when opportunity presents itself. I'm not sure this is a game that I really want to get involved in, but for those folks who are trying to keep score at home, it looks like the Chargers are going to go with Trey Lance for the first half and maybe even 1 or 2 series into the second half, and then we get to live through the DJU experience. What's interesting about Coach Harbaugh, he said Taylor Heineke, he knows what he's got in his potential number 2 quarterback, so wants to give Trey Lance a little bit of a longer leash. And on the flip side of things, I have to imagine it's Hendon Hooker for long stretches with the Lions. Keep in mind, though, this total has taken some over money, and it's worth paying attention to. 32.5 up to 34. I know history of the Hall of Fame game has been to go under the total, but the last couple of years we've seen a little bit more scoring. Last year, unfortunately, over bettors not able to get to the window when that game was canceled before 55 minutes were complete.
Well, my logic, and I mean, granted, I have the recreational gambling logic. I heard Trey Lance starting and I heard DJU playing. I took under just off that. That's enough for me. That's all.
I can respect it. I can respect it. I mean, anyone who watched DJU attempt to play the position at Florida State to finish out his college career, I understand why there is an increased level of skepticism in terms of what he'll be able to do in the National Football League, even against third stringers today in Canton, Ohio.
Yeah, and whatever. And if you're propping, Trey Lance passing yards unders have always been, they've been good to a lot of people, and that's just my thoughts. But all right, I want to get into college football because there's so much to get into. We're getting to the season. This is the time where I know y'all spend all summer looking at, win totals and futures and Heisman odds and all that kind of stuff. But your guy, Brad Powers, I've been looking at those power rankings. He put out his power rankings today, biggest movers, biggest drops, and I don't know. It kind of just seeing all that just gets me in the spirit. But as far as going to the season, who are you looking for big? It can be any 5, Power 5, G5, anybody on your radar for big improvements this year?
You know, when I talk about big improvements, I think we can start with some of the biggest fish in the pond, and right in your backyard in Big Ten country with Penn State, who finally has everything in front of them for James Franklin to finally try and climb to the top of the mountaintop. In my opinion, Ohio State has a lot of questions they have to answer by Buckeye standards when you're breaking in a new offensive and defensive coordinator there, a quarterback who checks a lot of the boxes in Julian Sain. And I think Penn State deserves to be the favorite in the Big Ten, despite what odds makers have with Ohio State kind of penciled in there right around 2-1. And when we look at the top of the board in that particular league, I think Oregon's another side that odds makers have a lot more faith in right now than I do. I'm on their win total under at 10.5. I've lived through the Dante Moore experience, albeit in Westwood, could be a little bit different than how he looks in Eugene with a year of seasoning behind a veteran quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. And I think the middle of the pack for that conference is as fascinating as maybe any league in the country. Was Indiana a mirage last year? Will they be able to pick up where they left off with Fernando Mendoza under center and a much more difficult schedule? Can Illinois live up to some of those expectations being heaped on them? Their win total sits at 8.5. We've seen a lot of professional bettors gravitating towards the under, despite that level of experience, and a quarterback that you know all too well in Luke Altmaier.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, what Michigan team are we going to get? If Bryce Underwood is the answer, I'm sure Perez will be thrilled if they can move themselves into the upper echelon. And then, of course, it's Nebraska. Their win total sitting at 7.5. Is this a year that Matt Rule gets that bump that we've seen in some of his previous stops at Temple and Baylor, and Dylan Raiola kind of answering the bell to make them a little bit of a dark horse in the Big Ten? But in terms of other teams that I'm probably a little bit higher on than market in the Big Ten specifically, look, I'm not going to say Northwestern is going to contend for a conference title, but I did bet them over their win total at 3.5. Very comfortable laying a price up to minus $1.70, minus $1.80. I think you upgrade the quarterback position substantially with Preston Stone coming over from SMU. And while, of course, we always wonder about Northwestern's skill position talent, this is a defense under Coach Braun that I think can take another step forward. So for me, it's a group that I think is a little bit undervalued in terms of regular season win total expectations. And coming on air in the Chicagoland area, I think Northwestern has an excellent opportunity to flirt with 5 and maybe even 6 wins if things break the right way. So that's kind of the buy-on team for me in the reg season wins total market in the Big Ten. Now, SEC-wise, buddy, I think there are a couple teams that are poised for a little bit of regression this year, one of which being the Tennessee Volunteers, win total 8.5. That's a schedule that sets up favorably for them, but Joey Aguilar, in my opinion, not the guy to lead that high-octane offense. I think offensively, there are a lot of questions they have to answer in the backfield and at receiver, and defensively, they masked a lot of what they didn't have offensively last year. So I look for them to underwhelm from a win total perspective. And one other that I'll give you in South Carolina, I actually just bet them earlier today. Lenora Sellers, I love, but you watch as much SEC football as anybody, and I think when we look at this South Carolina team and try and assess how they're going to backfill some of the players that they lost defensively, I'm not sure Shane Beamer has the answer. So I think South Carolina takes a step back. I like the Gamecocks under their total at 7.5 quite a bit, especially when you assess how difficult that schedule is from early October through the month of November.
No, I like that South Carolina call too, because another thing with that program, they're historically like a good underdog, and they always suck when they deal with expectations. And they came out of nowhere last year to go 9-3, almost sneak into the playoff. And they're one of the best defenses in the country, and they just lost, like you said. They lost so much. But I do like Sellers too, though. He's dynamic running in the open field. So the
team I got to ask you about, though, I've seen a little bit of money that I respect coming in on Ole Miss and their win total under. Look, I know the roster on paper isn't nearly as talented as the group Lane had down in Oxford last year, but I think so much of it hinges on Austin Simmons. Curious to get your take on what your expectations are for Ole Miss, who nobody's talking about as a legitimate conference contender, and you can understand why. But do you feel there's a little bit more upside there with the Rebs than the way they're being priced?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like an expectation. The problem is they had a top 3 defense in the country last year and lost 5 NFL draft picks, so you're regressing on defense. And I do think they have, as far as the talent on defense, they had 2 5-stars and a 4-star freshman that all redshirted last year. So they've got like young, talented dudes on the D-line. But where there's concern a little bit is at cornerback. You saw them trying to make some moves right after spring practice in the portal, which is always a little bit of a dicey sign. On offense, look, I think Austin Simmons the upside's tremendous. Obviously you got a small sample size, but he got thrust into, it was one drive, but that was a tough situation against Georgia in the rain. Off Georgia leading 7-0, converted 2 fourth downs. I think his upside's awesome, but I'm always hesitant because he's still only a sophomore, even though he's already graduated and he's 19. Like, I think you're going to see way more good than bad, but you're still going to see growing pains. Walker Jones, the head of Ole Miss NIL, looked me dead in the eye and said this is the deepest receiving core Ole Miss has ever had. When I was back there, I looked at him, I was like, man, come on. Like, you had A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Van Jefferson, and DeMarcus Lodge one year. Like, and he's like, no, this is the deepest they've had. So I think the offense is still going to be really good. I do. I just, how far does the defense regress? Are we talking like top 3 to like top 30? I think you're all right if that happens, but anything beyond that concerns me a little bit. Schedule does set up pretty favorable early. Got a scrub game. I think at Kentucky, damn sure better be a revenge game after that disaster in Oxford last year that cost them the playoff. Arkansas at home in a night game. Tulane week 4, little bit of a trap spot because Tulane likes to fight as an underdog, and LSU's at home behind that. So that Tulane game, I think they'll win, but maybe you don't see them cover. That might be a spot if Ole Miss is laying a lot. I'd be a little concerned. But back-to-back road games at Georgia and at Oklahoma in October, pretty tough there. So I don't know. I'm going in the year. I think 8-4, like top 25, like fun team. If Simmons shows growth, would be solid. I think as long as you don't go 6-6 or like have a 7-5 deal, you keep the momentum growing and then you build with Simmons in the future. But I said 8-4, and then all the Ole Miss fans just jumped down my throat and said I wasn't a true fan on Twitter, and I'm just like,
Hey, look, you have to keep a realistic approach and keep that fan base a bit grounded. But I think 8-4, if you continue to see the maturation of Austin Simmons, it'll create all sorts of energy and optimism around that program going into next season. But I think the most impressive part, you talking about Austin Simmons there, kid's 19 years old and he's already a college graduate. I'd have to imagine, Mintzy, that he would have put up a slightly better score on his ACT if he went head-to-head with you earlier this week.
Yeah, and I also graduated when I was 31, so he beat me. He beat me by just a little bit. He gets done in 2 years. I went in with Eli Manning and graduated with Chad Kelly. So, I got to say, he's a little smarter of a guy than I am. But looking around the rest of the SEC, I mean, you and I always talk a lot of LSU too because of my Louisiana ties. The opener at Clemson, Kelly's lost 5 in a row. I mean, this is a brutally tough opener. Night game, playoff team, Klubnik coming back, with a lot of momentum. But I'm still buying on the LSU thing this year. I think they finally got their collective right, and they spent $20 million on the roster. And I love that receiving core. With they're called. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you heard this name. The Legion of Zoom is what they're calling the LSU receiving core now. 4 guys running under a 4-4. Where they got Aaron Anderson, Nick Anderson, Chris Hilton, and Barrion Brown. And I don't know. I know they'll score a lot of points, but they went hard at the portal on defense. Got an all Big 12 safety from Houston, corners from Virginia Tech and Florida. Patrick Payton off the defensive end from Florida State. Big nose tackle from Virginia Tech. I know that's a lot of ifs. You never know how the season's going to break, but I feel like there should be some improvement. They should make the playoffs.
I mean, look, I hope for LSU fans, they're able to keep Nick Anderson on the field. It was one of the more frustrating players I know throughout Norman. They kept thinking that this guy was going to begin to scratch the surface again of what they'd had glimpses of in his debut campaign. So if Anderson can stay healthy, he is no doubt a very talented receiver that'll give Garrett Nussmeier a weapon. I think the biggest question going into that week 1 opener against Clemson, that LSU fans, you mentioned the defense, but can the offensive line pick up where they left off? We know it's going to look significantly different. And that was kind of one of the building blocks around the passing attack last year. And LSU going to have to show a little bit more balance, since that was the one thing that really stood out to me. For as well as that group pass block for extended stretches, they just could never get on track being able to create a balanced attack. And I think when you're trying to approach LSU in some of the season-long markets, look, the win total for me doesn't offer that much in the way of intrigue, either going over or under. But I do think this group has a lot of boom or bust potential. So if you believe that this is finally the year that Brian Kelly gets this LSU team to play a little bit better collectively on defense, the offense picks up where it left off, being able to get them at a price tag around plus 125 or better to make the playoff, or even have flirtations potentially winning the SEC if they can knock a Georgia, a Texas, or some of the other Alabama out of their way in doing so. LSU this year, in my opinion, has to kind of get to 10-2, or that heat continues to get ratcheted up. And I'll even go one step further. While LSU fans will probably get pissed off with this comment, I don't think the game week 1 against Clemson matters all that much in the grand scheme of things.
I agree completely.
The game on September 13 and holding serve against Florida, in Death Valley, a much more important game that'll define LSU season than what they do week 1 in a non-conference showdown against Clemson.
Yeah, I've been looking for a gambling opportunity because the LSU futures, they were 10-1 SEC, and now it went all the way. It's been bet down all the way to 7-1. I think there might be, if you really believe they can win it, you almost hope they lose to Clemson, and maybe it jumps to 10 or 12-1 off a reaction in the market after week 1. So that's kind of a potential thing I'm looking for a little bit. Some other SEC questions I got for you. Oklahoma, Mateer coming over from Washington State, great quarterback. Arbuckle coming with the OC. Look, Venables' defense was great last year. I mean, you saw what they did to Milroe. They just couldn't score. I mean, they were in the hundreds in offense. However, their offensive line sucked, and they didn't have any playmakers. I know Deion Burks is out there. Is there any help for him? Do they have enough on the O-line receiver for Mateer to have a good year and them to take a step forward?
That O-line is going to be the biggest question mark that I think everybody around the betting space has in regards to how they're assessing the Sooners and Oklahoma fans alike. And we're not going to have to wait long to see if Oklahoma has made improvements with that particular position group, because when Michigan comes to town, I know so much of the storyline going into that game will be around Michigan's starting quarterback. I anticipate it being Bryce Underwood. We'll see if it's Mikey Keene. But the defensive line is going to test OU right from the first snap of the game. And while Mateer is an electric athlete, a guy who I probably watch more than most, given his placement on that Washington State roster and the time zone I'm in out here, that can make plays with his arm. He can make plays with his legs, but he's going to have to be patient in the pocket. He can't look to run as soon as things break down around him. But Jackson Arnold, towards the end of last year for that Sooners group, just looked like a man who was beaten and battered and didn't trust any of his progressions, knowing that he wasn't going to get protected. I like the moves that Oklahoma made to bolster the backfield. I think bringing in Jade Knott from Cal after the spring will only help them create a little bit more balance. You mentioned the defensive play calling, and Brent Venables can kind of be hands-off this year with this team offensively. Look, I'm not a buyer or a seller for Oklahoma, but I do think they have a very wide range of outcomes if they can't protect their starting quarterback, because no matter how talented and elusive you are, bringing over your offensive coordinator from Washington State and Ben Arbuckle to run the same offense, if Mateer's running for his life, it's not really going to matter. And I think that game against Michigan early on in the season is going to be as fascinating as any other non-conference game we'll see, because Oklahoma fans would love to move them into that upper echelon in the SEC in kind of that second tier. And I think Michigan fans are going to see a defensive line more than capable of pinning its ears back and maybe trying to get a signature road win in the Sharon Moore era to start this season, building on that momentum they finished up last year with the win against Ohio State. And, of course, that dominant defensive performance against Jalen Milroe in Alabama in the bowl game.
Yeah, while we're at it, it's an easy transition to Jackson Arnold and going to Auburn. Can Hugh Freeze restore Jackson Arnold? Because Auburn definitely has talent at the wide receiver position. I know Freeze hadn't had the smoothest first 2 years, but, if Arnold could just get back to competent, I think there's a path to them being a little better this year.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think that game week 1 against Baylor is going to tell us an awful lot. People discussing Baylor as a legitimate threat in the Big 12. I think, 8 or 9 teams can win that league. But a fascinating quarterback matchup, because Sawyer Robertson was outstanding for Baylor, down the stretch last year, but Dave Aranda's defense left a lot to be desired. Just ask LSU fans. It felt like a glorified 7-on-7 game against that LSU offense that was a little bit undermanned in the bowl. But in terms of assessing Jackson Arnold, this is a guy, full disclosure here, I have a little bit of exposure to in the Heisman market, Mintzy.
Oh, wow.
I bet him at 50-1. I think he's got a little bit of opportunity and upside, given that offensive line down there. Jordan Hare is going to be much more talented than what he had in Norman a season ago. I like some of the skill position talent that Auburn has on that roster, both in the backfield and in the receiving room. And I think this is an Auburn team who has an opportunity to take the next step. So if I'm looking at the Tigers from top to bottom, this will be an Auburn team that I think you take some flyers on the bigger markets that are out there. Jackson Arnold to win the Heisman, maybe even dabble with them to be a Cinderella story of sorts to make the playoffs. I don't think they have enough to win the SEC, but this is a group that I'm going to be fascinated to watch and most likely going to find myself on as a short road favorite or maybe even a short road underdog week 1 when they go into Waco, which I think is a tone setter for the entire season knowing what that conference schedule looks like for Hugh Freeze.
Yeah, year 3 now for Freeze. He usually recruits pretty well, and I also think that he inherited a mess. I mean, it was...
Oh, no doubt about it.
I think that this was like a situation that, you think of Auburn football, you give them benefit of the doubt because they have a good history, but I think this was a lot more of a problem than people give them credit for. So I'm kind of bullish on Auburn. On the Alabama front, I'm curious what you think now. Year 2 for Kalen DeBoer. Like, the Ty Simpson looks like he's going to be the quarterback. Milroe obviously was so athletic, but he just didn't fit that offense. You look at the success he had with Michael Penix at Washington and Haener at Fresno State. Maybe he can have a guy maybe more suited to run his offense this year. Is that possible, you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think some of the whispers that came out of Tuscaloosa as the season wound down last year and even in the offseason about Jalen Milroe, you mentioned not being a fit, that he might not have had the best work ethic off the field. And had his head in the playbook to kind of learn an offense that was a little bit more complex. Bringing Ryan Grubbin, his former OC from Washington, I'm not going to say that Ty Simpson will look like Michael Penix leading that attack, but probably fits the mold a little bit better for a pro-style offense. I think Alabama fans have every reason to be excited about Keelan Russell, who you have to think is going to have a package or two, given the tantalizing talent there from a 5-star prospect. Ryan Williams, we know, is outstanding. One of the best wide receivers in college football and probably a talent that we'd be talking about a little bit more as a true number 1 in the sport if it wasn't for Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. I like this Alabama team quite a bit. I'm not running to bet them laying nearly 2 touchdowns on the road in Tallahassee week 1, despite some of the comments from Thomas Castellanos and the Florida State team at large. But I think Alabama is going to start to resemble what we grew accustomed to under Kalen DeBoer. You mentioned the multiple stops. And this guy has won everywhere from Fresno State to Washington and even stops along the way before that. So if Ty Simpson is the guy and can provide the pivot that Ryan Grubb needs to lead the offense, I think the defense will show some significant improvement as well, and really believe that Alabama is going to be a 10-win team and find themselves right back where they belong, very much in the mix for a conference championship and getting into the college football playoff, something that they came up just short of doing a season ago.
Okay. My only the Georgia Bulldog thing, I mean, you know what the defense is going to be. It's kind of one of those things where people want to write them off because it's, I guess it's fatigue. And also, I don't know, Gunnar Stockton now going to be the guy. I was very shocked Mike Bobo is still their offensive coordinator, to be very honest. I thought that was a move that would get made and didn't. But, hey, man, if you win football games 17-10, you're still winning football games. They kind of do it in a non-sexy way. Obviously saw that SEC championship was like that against Texas. But kind of feels like if you could not be talking about Georgia, that kind of almost feels like what's going on right now.
I mean, this schedule by SEC standards is about as soft as you're going to find. I mean, 3 true road games for the Georgia Bulldogs where they're going to be more than a touchdown favorite in all of them, at least on my numbers early in the season. They get Tennessee early in the year, and I think it's a Tennessee team who we talked about discussing win totals. It's going to be down a little bit. Joey Aguilar, not the guy, and I think Georgia can go on the road in Knoxville, win that game, and do so convincingly. One of the 3 road games that they'll play in a true road environment is against Mississippi State. And I know Brandon's not here to defend his Bulldogs, but let's not sugarcoat what Mississippi State is going to provide, this season and going forward. So by default, it makes the game on the road at Auburn the toughest road challenge they have. I'm not sure it's a slam dunk that they hold serve against Alabama, a game that every college football fan is going to watch. But there's no reason when you go through this Georgia schedule, unless Kirby's team has really fallen off and Gunnar Stockton isn't the answer under center, that the floor for Georgia this year should be 10-2, and they should have a real opportunity to have a flirtation with 11-1. And again, be right back in the discussion with a chance to atone for a game that probably left an extremely bad taste in their mouth, knowing it was more self-inflicted wounds than anything else in the playoff game against Notre Dame. 2 minutes that'll live in infamy down there in Athens for the way they finished that first half and really flipped the script, allowing the Golden Domers to take full advantage and kind of ride that wave at the end of the first half into an impressive second half performance to knock Georgia from the postseason.
It'll be interesting to see what the sequel of the Georgia Tech game is off that best game in college football last year. That was just
I'm amazed, honestly, for that rivalry. If you're Georgia Tech, that you signed off on turning this game into a neutral site of sorts where you can't control the ticket allotment. I mean, I know Georgia Tech is in Atlanta, but it's going to feel, in my opinion, like a Georgia home game more often than not if you can't pack that building like you could at Bobby Dodd with Georgia Tech fans. So that's a rivalry that I'd like to see on campus. I'm hoping this neutral site experiment of sorts, isn't something that continues. But if you're Georgia, you have to love it, knowing your two biggest rivals are games that you're never going to have to play in a true road environment going forward. And your regular season finale against Tech, and of course, playing Florida in Jacksonville every single year as well.
Yeah, last SEC team I got to ask about is the Florida Gators, because it's like, I mean, they closed the year. I mean, beating LSU, beating Ole Miss, ton of momentum. Lagway, came out. I mean, he's definitely been banged up going in. They obviously have a very tough schedule. Their win total, I believe, is like 6.5. I think it wasn't that high. However, I mean, you can't forget how they played at the end of the year. What do we expect here?
I mean, I think Billy did an incredible job last year. I mean, so many people, had him poised to get a pink slip early on in the season. We knew how daunting that schedule looked on paper. With a win total of 5.5, Florida goes out there, exceeds odds makers' expectations, and spoils the party with kind of their signature win of the campaign as a double-digit home underdog against Ole Miss, derailing the Rebels' postseason aspirations. And here we are with a Gators team that on paper should be more talented than what we saw last year. The schedule maybe a little bit easier, but still not exactly favorable by any stretch of the imagination. And you mentioned DJ Lagway. Wasn't 100% to close out the campaign last year. We know he had a couple of minor procedures, shows up to camp in a boot. And I think unless you know what DJ Lagway you're going to get, that is the $100 million question. Because if this guy goes into the season at 100%, he's one of the more electric and dynamic talents that you're going to find not just in the SEC, but the entire country. There's a reason that odds makers have paid him so much respect in the Heisman Trophy market as well at 16-1. But if he doesn't have mobility working in his favor, this Florida team falls off a cliff pretty quick. And we mentioned that road trip to LSU, a tricky home date, relatively speaking, against an in-state rival in USF. And they'll go on the road the following week to Miami. So we're going to get a pretty good indication of where Florida is after the first 4 games of the season when they have a preseason tune-up against LIU, but games against USF and on the road in Baton Rouge and on the road down there in Miami Gardens taking on Miami. If Florida can come through that 4-game set, even at 3-1, I think the Gators are in a very good spot and probably find themselves comfortably settling into that second tier in the conference.
Yeah, it really does feel like the winner of Florida LSU could be headed for a big season, and the loser is going to be having to play catch up like early. You mentioned how important that game is, September 13th, and I believe it's going to be a night game because last year after the UCLA LSU September game when it was like 100 in Death Valley and they ran out of water, the Louisiana lawmakers tried to pass a law that LSU is no longer allowed to play day games in September. You can't make
I mean, look, I can't really argue with it. You don't see a whole lot of games taking place in Tucson or spots out west where it's 105 at kickoff. So I have to imagine there's not enough brown liquor or water in the state of Louisiana to keep that fan base hydrated if you're going to have an 11 o'clock kickoff or even early afternoon during September where that southern humidity can get to be absolutely sweltering.
Well, despite the fact that I'm from the South, there are other conferences in the Southeastern Conference, and I want to move over to the Atlantic Coast Conference because I've got some questions here. Clemson, huge favorite, like plus 105, almost even money. Get it. Playoff team, Klubnik back. Understandably why they're a big favorite. My question's about behind them. Miami, seems to be hyped up to be the second best team. You're losing Cam Ward, who's the number 1 overall pick. Their defense sucked last year. I mean, it was like you watched a Miami game last year, and it would like jump off the screen how slow they were. I couldn't believe it. But they gave Cristobal a huge amount of money in NIL money, so you'd like to think they could improve on defense, and you've got the Carson Beck thing, who obviously had a very up and down last year. So I don't know what the hell to make of the Miami Hurricanes, and I'm curious where you are on them.
Look, Carson Beck is going to have a very good offensive line in front of him. So if he's able to come back from that surgically repaired elbow and gets his head on straight, realizing he has one more chance to move himself into the first round of some of the mock drafts like he was going into last year, how quickly we forget what this kid was expected to be, even though he was mired in inconsistency during his time in Athens. They're going to have to replace their entire receiving core, so a lot of unfamiliar faces there. So I'm very interested to see what Miami's offense looks like right out of the gates, where they'll have their hands full on that opening Sunday against the Fighting Irish. Defensively, I like the change at defensive coordinator. I mean, you mentioned how slow and out of position that team looked for stretches last year. Gone is Lance Guidry. In comes Corey Heatherman from Minnesota. And it's kind of a bend but don't break mentality. It was something that they were able to utilize. I'm sure Mario's going to want to lean into the ground game and try and shorten contests a little bit more than what we saw in that chuck and duck approach with Cam Ward under center. So I do think Miami is a clear-cut number 2 in the conference. Now, if they're able to live up to that potential, remains to be seen. And I'll make the case that from a value standpoint, they're probably a slightly better bet and more intriguing in that plus 350, plus $4 range than backing Clemson right around even money, although I do have Clemson as the top team in the ACC. And then it's anybody's best guess in terms of who the third best team could be, at least on paper. Is SMU able to pick up where they left off? Kevin Jennings regained some of that composure that he didn't show in the ACC title game or against Penn State, where he handled the football like it was a hand grenade and put the Mustangs in a number of tough spots. I think SMU has a little bit of regression here, not going out on a limb for a team that, ran the table in the ACC, at least in the regular season in their maiden voyage. Georgia Tech's a team that a lot of people I know love Haynes King. They have done a tremendous job getting this group to overachieve, one of the best programs in the country as a double-digit underdog over the last couple of seasons. But one thing that concerns me for Georgia Tech, I wonder how this defense is going to look. I think Tyler Santucci as their defensive coordinator was a guy that didn't get enough buzz for how buttoned up that group was for stretches, given the talent he had to work with. So if that defense falls off, it puts a little bit more pressure on a Georgia Tech offense that's down a couple of playmakers that they leaned heavily on last year, most notably Eric Singleton. And then Louisville, they bring in a transfer quarterback in Miller Moss from USC, who in my opinion got a little bit of a raw deal planned for Lincoln Riley last year. He goes into what can be a quarterback-friendly system. I think Louisville's got the best running back tandem, arguably in the entire conference. And if this team can do a little bit on the defensive side, maybe Louisville becomes a true value proposition. But it truly does feel like those 5 teams are cut above. And then, of course, you get into the Pittsburghs, the Florida States, the Dukes of the world, and which of those teams can either have a bounce-back situation unfold, like in the case of Florida State, or who's got a little bit more sustainability kind of being in that second tier. So this is a league for me that it feels like Clemson, Miami, and everybody else, but we know anything that can happen often does. And this is a league, I should say, that at the bottom, I think there are a couple of surefire wins and teams that are going through a rebuild. And
Virginia looks really rough right now. Virginia looks really bad right now.
Tony Elliott claims that they're going to be better. They go out and bring Chandler Morrison from North Texas, who they think is going to be an upgrade. The thing about Virginia and why I want to fade them, I'm with you. I don't think the talent level is that good. But, man, that schedule has a lot of soft landing spots for them. And I think it's an offense that at least early on will be able to put up some crooked numbers. But we're going to get plenty of opportunities, in my opinion, to bet against a Virginia team who was actually a bet on team, at least from professional bettors, and that win total opened at 5.5. But I wouldn't be shocked, Mintzy, if we saw some under money start to enter the market at 6.5. It's kind of painted across the board.
I got a play I'm looking at week 1. I'm curious what your opinion on. You mentioned the Miami thing, how they're going to try to run the ball more, be a little more patient. Notre Dame's breaking in a new quarterback. Those Miami totals could be inflated early in the year because of how wild those games got last year. I think I saw 54 for Notre Dame, Miami week 1. I felt like that seems a little high.
And I'm not going to disagree with you. If you need anything to push you across the finish line, go back and look at how Notre Dame has played in some of these marquee matchups week 1 under Marcus Freeman. They have turned these games, especially in hostile territory, into slogs. Just ask A&M fans what they had to live through last year in College Station. The Irish wanted to impose their will physically. I think they're going to lean into their very talented tandem of backs. They're not going to try and air it out. And while I know Notre Dame will look a little bit different with some of their defensive personnel, DC as well, with Al Golden, taking his talents to be the defensive coordinator with the Cincinnati Bengals, I'm right there with you. It feels like the first team to 27 wins that football game. And would it shock anybody if it was 24-20 or somewhere in that ballpark? So definitely a strong lean early on to going under the total. And at under a field goal, I'd also lean towards the Irish as well. I think they get the nod in the coaching box. And while Miami brings in the more experienced quarterback, I think the Irish will have a few wrinkles, especially on the offensive side, to try and confuse a new defense, breaking in a new defensive coordinator and a lot of fresh faces past, some of the guys on the defensive line in Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor.
Yeah, I also feel like Freeman's kind of got to the point as Notre Dame coach that if you can get under 3, you just almost feel like he's going to pull it out. He's got that, I don't know what it is.
He definitely has a knack for getting his team to be buttoned up in games that feel like coin flips. It's where they enter contests as that 3-touchdown favorite that you begin to get a little bit more worried about. And trust me, if Notre Dame exceeds oddsmakers' expectations week 1 against Miami and at home week 2 against Texas A&M, we know we're going to have a spot or two to be able to bet against the Irish as a big time favorite. Well, they'll no doubt fall flat on their face.
Yeah, that's definitely been the knock on the Freeman era. Last ACC question I got. I like Eli Holstein a lot at Pittsburgh. I thought he was lighting it up against a really weak schedule early last year. He got hurt toward the end and fell off. I mean, do you think they could have an explosive offense again?
I'm real curious to see what this group looks like. Cade Bell gave them a little bit of life offensively for a Pittsburgh team that probably best described as stagnant and boring to watch. You mentioned Eli and what he was able to do when he was healthy. The emergence of Desmond Reed in the backfield. I mean, kind of an all-purpose receiver, not just as a runner and a receiver, but can also contribute on special teams. Defensively, I have some questions about Pitt. I have seen a little bit of over money come in on their reg season win total at 5.5, heavily shaded to the over. I don't think they're as good as the team that started 7-0. I don't think they're as bad as the team that we saw, finish the season losing 6 straight games with a banged up quarterback and going on the road at Dallas and getting absolutely boat raced. Fascinating game for me with Pitt comes early on in that backyard brawl. We'll get to see the new look West Virginia team with a familiar face on the sidelines there in Rich Rod. So that's a game that I think serves as a good measuring stick for both teams. Not really sure what to expect from Pitt. I've never been an Arduzzi guy, but I do like what this team has offensively with their OC and some of the skill position talent as well.
Yeah, I mean, Arduzzi allegedly a defensive guy is an old Michigan State defensive coordinator, and they couldn't. I mean, their game, the Pitt overs the first 6 or 7 weeks last year it was just unbelievable how crazy it was. All right, going to go to the Big 12. You mentioned you thought 8 or 9 teams could win this league. There are some kind of fascinating storylines. Whoever the hell, I forgot the guy's name, this Texas Tech oil tycoon that just got all this money, they spent more in the portal. I mean, they threw down this year. They spent, Tech had a top 3 transfer portal haul. Obviously McGuire's got a ton of energy. He's a well-loved guy. Did they have a real shot in this league now this year?
I mean, look, I think the guy you're referring to, Cody Campbell, decided he was going to open up the wallet and pump a little bit of money into West Texas. And for those folks who haven't seen the video that Tech put out for what their facilities look like, good Lord, you can understand why players would want to go down there and take full advantage of being a part of this football program. But it's still a team and a school that's never been to a Big 12 conference championship. And it's real tough for me to necessarily buy in, even with all the portal additions, both on the offensive and defensive side. I mean, I know you've watched a good amount of Tech football. Do we believe that Baron Morton is the answer? And more importantly, do we think Baron Morton can stay healthy for a full season? I mean, that's always been the question mark. I know he says going into fall camp that his shoulder is feeling better than what it has over the last couple of years. Whether it's lip service or not remains to be seen. But Tech, very soft opening to their season schedule. So they'll essentially get 3 preseason games and a chance to go out there and get their sea legs under them. But you mentioned, the number of teams. Utah, do they have a bounce back season with Devin Dampier and a ton of questions at the skill position? Can Avery Johnson look the part of being a Heisman dark horse that I think a lot of people thought last year? What do we get from an Iowa State team who brings back a quarterback in Rocco Beck, but couldn't stop a nosebleed on the ground in the Big 12 championship game? And it was a run defense that, you in your prime in your early 20s might have been able to rip off 6-7 yards of carry against them. Baylor offensively should be very good. UCF, kind of a throwaway season in year 0 for Scott Frost. I think West Virginia the same. 2 teams, though, that I think can surprise a little bit, and I'll take a flyer on both of them, and I have already at long shot prices. Houston, I think with Connor Wegman, if he can be the guy to lead the offense for Willie Fritz. Willie's been a guy that I've loved to bet on, once he has a chance to build that program up, and maybe it's a year ahead of schedule. But at 40 or 50 to 1, even revamping that entire defense, losing your defensive coordinator, let's see what Armstrong can do if he can get Houston playing to a similar level with some fresh faces on that side of the ball, because the offense can't possibly be as bad as what we saw last year. And I think Arizona is a team whose win total sits at 5.5, right around 40 to 1 to win the league. Look, maybe they don't have a chance to kind of go from worst to first, but it's a very veteran roster for Brent Brennan. I like what he was able to do at San Jose State when nobody wanted to give them a ton of credit, one of the more difficult places to recruit to. And even without Tet McMillan in the receiving corps, I think Noah Fafita can have a little bit of a bounce-back season. So I would be willing to take a flyer on 2 long shots there in Houston and Arizona, and maybe steer clear of some of the favorites. And a team we didn't even mention that we're going to see on the Monday of Labor Day weekend, Josh Hoover, a quarterback that every college football fan should know. I love this kid's skill set, and I think he's a guy that may find a rapid ascent into being maybe even a day 2 pick in the NFL, if not sneaking into that back half of the first round.
Yeah, TCU. My question is I want to ask about Devin Dampier at Utah and where you are on him. Because like when you looked at Utah the last few years, every year the Cam Rising thing just never ended. You know, he's supposed to be the guy, and he just kept getting hurt. But they do still play really good defense. And Dampier comes over from New Mexico where they scored a lot of points. He brought his OC. He's 5'11". I'm worried about his durability, but as much as he likes to run, can he get through a whole season? But in theory, if the offense could take a step forward, they still have a defense that could have a chance in that league.
Look, again, another guy. We talked a little bit about Mateer and how it's a seamless transition despite going to a new program, bringing over your offensive coordinator. Dampier is going to have that same luxury. Jason Beck comes with him from Albuquerque up the road to Utah. The problem that I have with Dampier, and with a little bit more film and slightly more athletic defenses that he'll face in the Big 12 than what he encountered in the Mountain West, his passing, for anybody that watches some of that tape at New Mexico, guys had to be wide open because he's not going to put the ball into tight windows. He is extremely elusive in terms of his ability to break tackles and use his legs to extend plays, but I'm not sure he provides enough of true dual threat capabilities. And I think the opener is going to be a phenomenal litmus test when they're on the road at UCLA as a 6.5 point favorite to get a better indication of what we're going to see from Dampier. But you mentioned Utah, and defensively, they're always stout. They're going to be healthier on that side of the ball. The offensive line has an All-American and Spencer Fano that's going to kind of anchor that group that's got a ton of experience. So I can understand why Dampier caught a lot of buzz in the Heisman market at prices 75 to 1 or more, but I'm going to kind of reserve judgment. I didn't love some of what I saw from Utah last year, even with them as banged up as they were. I get the feeling that Kyle Whittingham has one foot out the door, came back, may want to finish on a high note, but Utah is not a team that I'm running to buy. But at the same time, I'm also not looking to sell the Utes in any of the preseason markets.
Okay. I want to hit on a little G5 stuff too. Obviously, I've got some ties with Tulane. The Jake Retzloff coming down there, because that Tulane quarterback situation was a Chinese fire drill until he did. Mintzy got the big offer from Duke. Obviously, they weren't going to match it. You see TJ Finley going to his 5th school in 5 years. Obviously, he's not on the team anymore. But, Summerall's a damn good coach, and they're the favorite now in the AAC, and I love that Retzloff move. And I'm actually going to Northwestern at Tulane, 11 a.m. opener in NOLA that Saturday, August 30th. I'm going to be there for that. But I don't know. I'm kind of buying the Tulane thing, but however, market-wise, they're 3-1 to win the AAC. I don't know how much value there is there.
Yeah, I'm not running to bet them to win the AAC, and I think their non-conference schedule is one of the more difficult that you're going to find for a team that comes into a G5 league as, the prohibitive favorite, so to speak. You mentioned that game week 1, and Mintzy, I actually have a bet there. I took a little bit of Northwestern plus the 7. I'd still feel comfortable with folks looking to try and back the Wildcats plus 6.5 for just the reasons that you outlined. I think anytime a coach that's usually as in tune with his roster as Coach Summerall has been at Troy and now at Tulane, has plenty of reservations about how things are going to unfold. And if Jake Retzlaff does win the battle, I'm not sure how much of the playbook they're going to have at their disposal right out of the gate. So I think Tulane is going to be in for a 4-quarter fight. And what a game that I think, is going to be a little bit lower scoring, maybe even than the total suggests at 47. I like the dog plus the points. And then you look at a plucky South Alabama team, one that I know was, basically depleted in the portal that still brings back a decent amount of talent. I don't think that's necessarily a slam dunk headed down to Mobile week 2. And then again, you get the home date against Duke. We know Tulane has had that circled. I think they'd be a live underdog there. And we already talked about the road trip to Oxford. So this will be a Tulane team that I've sold a little bit in the big picture market with their win total at 8.5. But anytime you have an elite head coach, one that's going to be poised for a much bigger job in the near future, it's a little bit of buyer beware. But I just get the feeling that this roster being in a state of flux wouldn't shock me if Tulane started AAC play at 1-3 and with a win total of 8.5. You're going to have a lot of things that need to go right. That includes some difficult road dates late in the year against Memphis and UTSA that could derail any conference championship aspirations.
Yeah, the only thing on the Northwestern Tulane is, man, that 11 a.m. on August 29th or whatever is going to be hot for those Chicago guys. Whew, damn, it's going to be, that one's going to be it's going to be a warm one in New Orleans, that humidity. But I definitely get the logic. Rest of AAC, you mentioned, Memphis lost a 4-year starting quarterback. They obviously had a very high-octane offense. Is Brown back? Is he healthy at Florida State? South Florida? Is Bryce Brown healthy this year?
Yeah, South Florida's a team, again, win total sits at 6.5. I think this group can take another step in their overall development. Am I betting them with that daunting schedule with a win total at 6.5? No, want no part of them in a big picture market. But I think Alex Golish deserves a world of credit. If Brown is healthy, one of the more under the radar dynamic dual threats that you're going to find at the G5 level. And I think they're probably a very live underdog. Week 1, an relatively early kickoff, I think 5:30 Eastern on that first Thursday of the season, as they'll welcome in a Boise State team who's very good and a rightful favorite in the Mountain West. USF's a team that if they can get through the non-conference portion of their schedule healthy with a very difficult road in front of them, I think is going to offer a little bit of opportunity and upside from a week-to-week point spread perspective. And as we go through the rest of the league, I'm not a Ryan Silverfield guy. I think Memphis is a team that always gets a ton of hype when you go through the recruiting rankings and everything else. A spot maybe to circle on your calendar. They get the rare home date against an SEC foe against Arkansas that I have to imagine Memphis fans are going to be thrilled to welcome in the Hogs there. And a UTSA team that brings back pretty much everything offensively. We talk about Jeff Traylor. It feels like every coaching carousel cycle that this guy is destined to take a bigger job. Eventually, he's going to have to take one. But I think this Roadrunners offense can be a lot of fun to watch. So the AAC, for me, probably the most exciting league to watch on a game-in, game-out basis amongst the G5. And this coming from a guy who used to watch way too much Mountain West football. But as the Mountain West continues to decline, we know Conference USA is a throwaway. I have questions about the Sun Belt. It feels like this AAC can be an awful lot of fun with 4 or 5 teams that, if things break the right way, may have a legitimate shot to win the league, including one of our service academies in Navy if Blake Horvath builds what was a very dynamic season, both as a runner and a thrower last year in Annapolis.
Yeah, I feel like there's going to be a McCown playing quarterback in Texas till the end of time. It's just unbelievable. It's been going on forever, and obviously UTSA has one. Other G5 questions I got. A lot of hype on James Madison this year, plus 290 in the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt last year, Marshall won it. Then the whole deal with Charles Huff leaving. Feels like, he bring half his team to Southern Miss? Something like that. I saw the Brad Powers power rankings. Marshall, the biggest loser. Southern Miss, the biggest winner. But what are you buying on James Madison and then the rest of the league? Like, who's going to emerge?
Yeah, I think JMU is a worthy favorite, and this may surprise folks who pay attention to G5 football. It feels like JMU has won that league multiple times. They've yet to get to the top of the heap in the Sun Belt, and arguably their best chance would have been, their first year when they made the transition from the FCS and they were eligible. This is an interesting quarterback room as well. It looks like Alonzo Barnett won't be ready for the season opener. But what do you do if you're a smart head coach? You reunite with your former quarterback at Holy Cross, Kyle Sluka, he of NIL fame out here in UNLV when the payments didn't clear. I think Sluka is a perfect fit to go back to running Cressy's offense and know that this is a team that loves to design runs for their quarterback. So you need depth in that particular room. And for JMU, non-conference dates against Louisville and Liberty. Look, if they play Louisville tight and can run the table, maybe they're their G5 representative ahead of Boise State getting into the college football playoff. You mentioned Marshall. This is a team that I think is going to go through some growing pains and a first-year head coach in Tony Gibson, who comes over from ACC football. I don't have high expectations for the Herd. I know they're a group that's been sold in the market. And on the flip side of things, you mentioned Southern Miss essentially taking good portions of that Marshall roster. I think it's 21 transfers in total for Coach Huff. They opened as high as 35-1 to win the Sun Belt, a number that wasn't widely available. Let's just say that number no longer exists.
Yeah, I looked at it today. It's 14-1 today. I looked at it today.
Exactly. That number's come down, and we've even seen them take money in their home opener against Mississippi State. That was a price that opened 13.5. I think we're down as low as 10.5, 11. Again, rare for an SEC team to go on the road in Hattiesburg. So you have to think that USM with a first-year head coach will be ready to roll and a quarterback that might be one of the most dynamic in the belt. A team that I'm going to be interested to watch, though, Georgia Southern, a little bit lean in terms of what this group has in their front seven. I think they're going to be struggling to stop the run, but an offense that could be as dynamic as any team in the league when you look at their quarterback, running back, and wide receiver combos. And then Old Dominion, I think, is a team that's going to be a worthwhile team to watch. They bring back, one of their top tacklers, not just in program history, but a guy who's got an opportunity to break, the NCAA record for total tackles. And a team offensively, they can hit the big plays. They just have a quarterback that's going to need to scale things back from a turnover-worthy throw perspective. So Sun Belt to be a fun league. I don't think it's going to be as good as what we've seen in the past. And two teams, though, that I do want to kind of sell. Coastal Carolina, defensively, they're going to be an abject disaster, in my opinion, even though you bring over Louisiana Tech's defensive coordinator, a guy I like quite a bit. And I did not like the Dowell Loggins hire in Boone at App State. Good recruiter, but not somebody I'm going to trust to develop a game plan or X's and O's on a week-in, week-out basis.
Okay. And, that's kind of most of it. Any Mountain West stuff other than you said it's kind of fallen off? You think Boise worthy favorite? Any other? UNLV is supposed to regress a lot, even though it's Dan Mullen's first year.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like Boise State's league to lose. I mean, they're an odds-on favorite for a reason at minus $1.30. I think that offers some value. I think UNLV is going to go through some growing pains, some interesting talent at quarterback. I think Dan Mullen will be able to get this offense playing at a high level. But defensively, they just lost a ton. Hawaii's a team to keep tabs on. We'll see what Timmy Chang is able to do. He's got a Vegas guy under center that showed flashes late in the year. And they're going to kind of have that standalone time slot against Stanford for a chance for a big win. They've taken money, moved from a 2.5-point dog to a 2.5-point favorite, out of the gates. I'm not as bullish on San Jose State as some people are. And I think this league at the bottom, unfortunately, there's not nearly as much parity. So in their final season in the Mountain West, I feel like it's Boise State's to lose, even without Ashton Genty. Spencer Danielson has a roster from top to bottom that dwarfs a lot of what the other teams in the Mountain West can field on a week-in, week-out basis.
Well, hell yeah. Well, I got to say, I feel a lot more knowledgeable about college football than I did 40 minutes ago when this started. So I got to thank you for that. Any other? I know you said you took a few Heisman futures. Any other futures you put out?
Yeah, you know what? Let me pull up some, make sure I can give you the most accurate stuff I have there. Heisman-wise, I mentioned Jackson Arnold is one of the long shots. Also have some exposure on Sam Levitt. I know that number's come down a little bit, but would feel comfortable backing him at a price tag of 20 to 1 or better.
Yeah, Jordan Tyson being healthy. Tyson being healthy again's huge for him.
Yeah, I mean, getting Jordan Tyson back, not necessarily having a player of Cam Scadaboo that you can lean into. I think Kenny's going to put a lot more on Levitt's plate. You're going to see him as kind of that dynamic dual threat. So that's a guy that's out there. This won't make me much of a Patriot, but Army under 7.5. In my opinion, this is an Army team that really comes back to earth from where they were last year. So I think it's a team that can struggle to get to that 6-win threshold and get bowl eligible. But those are some of the main pieces, that are kind of out there for me. Don't have much in the portfolio in the way of conference champions or anything else, a market that I want to dig into. But like we've talked about, Mintzy, so many of these non-conference games, we see the betting market overreact even before these teams play a single game in the league. And I think that's where some of the opportunity is going to be created for folks that don't want to create some of that unnecessary exposure in that non-conference portion of the schedule, especially in early September.
Hell yeah. Well, I just can't wait for the season. I know we're sitting here today. It's July 31st. Starting a little early this year, too. Week 0, August 23rd. This thing's going to be here before we know it. And so, like I said, this is the time to do your research for sure if you want to get to the window this fall. And as always, shout out DraftKings. We love our partnership with them. Todd, just thank you for giving me this time. I mean, I can't always love talking college football with you, and especially the knowledge is just so good, especially when you get to the G5. Like, I'm a huge SEC guy, but I love when you go in depth on the G5 and I feel like I just learned.
Look, I mean, there's nobody who loves, a Tuesday night Conference USA game or a midweek action till November than the folks at Barstool. So we'll get it all covered, buddy. Thanks for the opportunity, and hopefully we can do it again soon as the season continues to inch a little bit closer for all of us.
Hell yeah, we'll do an NFL day like this in a few weeks too.
That works, buddy.
All right. Thanks to Todd Fuhrman. We got Tyler Moody about to join us here in a second because we got to get this Major League Baseball trade deadline. Shout out to Todd, though. Follow him on Twitter at Todd Fuhrman. Man, just the knowledge the man drops. I just love talking ball and gambling on that level. And just the dude knows what's up, man. And, I've been following him for a lot of years. So shout out to that. And then we're going to try to get Moody on here because I don't want to leave, even though it's been a long Wake Up Mintzy. I want to get Moody's reaction to the trade deadline. A lot of news today. Carlos Correa going back to Houston from the Twins. Mason Miller, the A's closer, going to San Diego. They got the number one of the top prospects in baseball back. So the A's got to feel really good. Padres going all in. They traded for Ryan O'Hearn and made the trade with the Orioles. Will the Cubs make I hadn't checked my phone in the last hour, so I don't know if the Cubs made a deal. You saw the Seattle Mariners made a huge move, getting Eugenio Suarez, the power hitting third baseman from Arizona. The Cleveland, I almost called them the Indians. See, that was bad. Cleveland Guardians trade Shane Bieber to the Blue Jays. Can Bieber stay healthy down the stretch? But if he can, the upside's huge. But he hadn't pitched in a year and a half. So a lot of stuff going on. The Yankees got Bednar.
Right, I'm here. Sorry.
No worries, man. I just wanted to get some reactions from this deadline because it was a wild one today. Anything happened in the last hour?
It has been insane. I'm telling you, it's one of the craziest trade deadlines that I can recall in recent memory, Mitts. Obviously, let's start with the big one, the Padres getting Mason Miller, just one of the craziest trades I've ever seen. Leo DeVries going to, truly probably the best prospect in all of baseball, being sent over to the Padres. I think the Padres messed up in this trade. I understand getting Mason Miller. They want to turn him into a starter. He's one of the best arms in baseball. I understand it from that standpoint. But, geez, this was such a big trade. DeVries he's got all the talent in the world. Absolute home run for the A's. No one has won the trade deadline quite like the A's have. They're going to pair DeVries with that infield they have with Kurtz and Wilson. This is an absolute home run for them. The Cubs doing a little bit, nothing serious so far to this point. They got a reliever. They got Willie Castro from the Twins. He's a solid utility bat. Red Sox got Dustin May. They were trying to make moves to starting pitching. I don't think they ended up coming up with what they wanted. They were in on Joe Ryan. There was actually a release by Yahoo Sports saying that they made that trade, Mintz, and then they had to redact it. So that trade did not happen. They ended up getting Dustin May. The Rangers made a couple of interesting trades at the deadline. They went and got Merrill Kelly from
the Rangers did since we've been talking the last hour?
They did it 20 minutes ago, I would say. They went and got Merrill
Kelly.
Wow,
that's big because you were concerned they weren't going
to
to do anything. Now you had Merrill Kelly. Wow, that adding him to that rotation.
And have added no bats. The Rangers went all pitching. They got two relievers, Colomb and Maton, and they bring in Merrill Kelly. If the Rangers make the playoffs, they're going to have the best starting rotation in the American League going into the playoffs. There's no question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Valdi, DeGrom, and Merrill Kelly. 1, 2, 3. Damn.
And that makes me think they're going to move Rocker to the bullpen. There's a chance maybe that the Rangers flip Rocker or Leiter here. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think they'll probably just save them. But one of those two, if not, Corbin, I don't think he would go to the bullpen. But I do think the Rangers are going to move one of them to the pen. The Yankees just landed Camilo Doval. They got Bednar and Doval. They also have Williams. That Yankees bullpen just got loaded in the last 20 minutes or so. That is
they traded for Cedric Mullins too, right?
They got Cedric Mullins as well. No, the Mets got Cedric Mullins.
Oh, my bad.
Cedric Mullins going to the Mets. There's so much stuff that has happened. That's what's been so insane about this. I mean, it's just one of the craziest trade deadlines I can recall in a long ass time. I mean, there's been so much that has happened. Obviously, the two big trades for the Mariners, they get Naylor and Eugenio Suarez. I mean, massive moves there. It says the Astros are in on Dylan Cease at the deadline. We'll see if they're able to get that done.
What do you think of Correa going back to Houston?
Correa going back to Houston is a huge thing. I got to give the Astros a ton of credit. I don't think I've seen any team during my adult life do a better job at making trades at the deadline or in the middle of the offseason than the Astros do. I hate it as a Rangers fan, but damn, they're so good at the freaking deadline. They get Correa. He's going to play third base. He'll replace Isaac Paredes, who's out for the season. Great trade. They bring back one of their guys. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Twins are eating some of that money. The Astros did give up a sizable amount to make that trade happen, but it's a great trade for the Astros. Houston doing a hell of a job at the deadline. I mean, you got to give them credit. And they got Jesus Sanchez from the Marlins. The one thing that lineup was really missing was a left-handed bat to pair with a potentially healthy Yordan Alvarez. They get that in Jesus Sanchez. He can play left or right. Great trade by the Astros. I mean, just tip of the cap to them. So all three of the teams in the American League West definitely got better. The Red Sox getting a little bit better. They just landed they got Dustin May from the Dodgers. So they were one of the teams that was looked at getting starting pitching. They missed out on Sandy. They missed out on Cease, it looks like, and they ended up going Dustin May. The Tampa Bay Rays just acquired Griffin Jacks. That's interesting. Great arm, elite stuff, has closer potential. They just made that trade. There's a chance that they could be trading away their closer here at the deadline as well. So, I mean, there's just it's so much to keep up with, Mintz. It has truly been the craziest deadline that I can recall.
And then you mentioned yesterday all the closers that were going to move, and then they did. You didn't even mention, Duran got moved from the Twins. Helmsley
Yep.
got moved. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, a lot of that stuff happened yesterday. Helsley on the move, Duran on the move. I mean, just the amount of trades that we've seen happen. Mason Miller getting moved was obviously the blockbuster. We knew there would be a lot of those relief arms getting moved. We kind of talked about that a couple days ago. The fact that damn near every major reliever has been traded, though, is crazy. I mean, I think literally every closer we talked about has been on the move and then some. So this is, I mean, it's been insane. Maybe the most notable names still sitting out there that has not moved, Dylan Cease. And I would say Luis Robert. There was talk that maybe the White Sox will just hold on to him and pick up his option this offseason. They have a $20 million team option on him. They can do in the offseason and potentially trade him if they want to or bring him back. So it looks like, unless something has changed in the last 3 minutes, that he's going to be staying put. So all the teams that needed to make moves, they made moves. I mean, the only team
Tigers didn't do as much as I thought they might.
they've added a little bit. They added a
Sewald.
couple relievers. Yeah, some small moves. Nothing crazy. They didn't do a whole lot. And that's a team with a pretty deep farm system that I thought was going to make some moves. They elected to not do anything crazy. The Dodgers surprisingly quiet. That's one thing that
A lot of people thought one of these bullpen guys would go there.
I was almost positive they were going to get a Helsley or somebody like that. I mean, they have some dudes coming back. Blake Trinan just came off the IL, so like they're getting guys back. Their bullpen should get better whenever they're fully healthy. But man, we forgot about Ryan O'Hearn to the Padres. Great land for the Padres. That's one of the guys I was hoping the Rangers would go get. Didn't end up happening. He ends up with the Padres. Gives them another left-handed bat to throw in that lineup that crushes right-handed pitching. I mean, just deal after deal after deal. It looks like there's still stuff coming in from Jeff Passan.
I'm curious, is Sandy Alcantara going to stay? And I kept thinking they'd move him.
It looks like it, which is crazy because he would have been Reynolds, so he's not getting traded. 17 minutes ago it says the Marlins are going to hold on to Sandy, so he's staying put, not going to be moved, which I do think is a little crazy. The Marlins probably couldn't get what they thought he was worth because he hasn't pitched to his potential this season, but still, I mean. Yeah, pretty crazy stuff. The Tigers also just got Charlie Morton. We mentioned the Rays got Griffin Jacks, and
Marcell Ozuna stayed in Atlanta, huh?
Marcell Ozuna staying put. That's one guy that I really thought would get traded.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know what the Braves are doing there. I think some teams may be a little reluctant to go after him because of the domestic abuse stuff in the past and whatnot. So maybe they didn't want to add him to the roster. It looks like another thing just came down. Louis Varland to the Blue Jays, small minor move, adds to their bullpen, nothing crazy, but he's got really good stuff. So, I mean, the American League in particular went crazy today. All of the teams in the race made moves. The biggest blockbuster, Mason Miller getting moved, and the Rangers getting Merrill Kelly is
I didn't expect that either because you thought the Rangers would try to go get hitting because you felt good. You already felt good about the pitching, and they add another starter.
And they added two bullpen guys. They added a lefty and a righty. They're definitely going to be moving Rocker to the bullpen. I would think they're going to move Rocker to the bullpen. He would be great as a one-inning guy. I mean, he's got elite stuff. He just hasn't showed up as a starter just yet. He's had flashes for sure. But, I mean, big deal for the Rangers. If the Rangers get into the postseason, they're going to be crazy scary with that starting rotation. I guess they're just expecting some of these bats. Look, if they hadn't given Jock Peterson 2 years, $37 million, the Rangers would have been in the hunt for one of these bats. But the Rangers have said, we're not going over the luxury tax. And from the way it sounds, the Diamondbacks picked up a lot of the money remaining on Merrill Kelly because the Rangers sent a pretty good haul in return. They sent some of the top arms in the farm system to get him. So it sounds like the Diamondbacks are probably going to pick up some of that. So definitely interesting thing, though.
I want to ask what you think of the Bieber to Toronto thing because I thought that was a gamble worth taking, and they gave up like their number 5 pitching prospect. But I like that move by the Blue Jays. They're first right now, and I know he hadn't pitched in a year and a half, but man, when Bieber's like a Cy Young guy when he's pitching well, and I like that gamble. Like, it might not pay off, but the upside makes it worth it with them already being first.
I love it. They sent a guy that's good. He's got like a 2 ERA and a sub 1 WHIP. Definitely one of the better arms in their farm system. It's a good trade on both sides. Listen, if Bieber is Bieber, this is an absolute home run. This is one of the best trades of the deadline if Shane Bieber comes back and is 95% of himself. You know what I mean? Like, this is a hell of a deal for them if this comes to fruition. That he is the same guy that he was beforehand. So I love it for the Blue Jays. That's how crazy this is, how much stuff has happened. Because we actually forgot to mention that originally. So yeah, definitely one of the top names being moved at this deadline. You gotta like what the Blue Jays did. They went out and got some guys to help them out. They haven't been in a position in a while to compete for the American League, and obviously they're trying to hold off the Red Sox and the Yankees. I like it for the Blue Jays. They're a very legitimate threat here going into the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, like, I know it's because I talk to you every day and how much you follow it, but this is the most exciting. Like I said it yesterday, man. This Major League Baseball is exciting right now.
There's a ton because it feels like there's a little bit more parity this year because the Dodgers are not as dominant. Betts has regressed a little bit and
Yeah, and
as he
the
ages.
Yankees are
Their
struggling too.
bullpen, right? The Yankees are struggling. So you have these two teams that have really dominated for the last couple years. The Yankees not as much, but the fact that the Dodgers appear to be vulnerable, and you're just seeing all these teams, some of them going all in to
The
make a run at it
Padres
this season.
specifically.
The Padres specifically, I'd put the Mariners right there in that conversation. The Mariners are a team that have not made a run in the postseason in a long ass time, and they sent a lot of their farm system to acquire the guys that they acquired. They actually won the Naylor trade. The Suarez deal's a solid one on both sides, but all these teams are in. The teams that didn't do a ton, I would say the Tigers and the Cubs did the least. Not that they didn't do anything, but they were, the Cubs especially. They got the Brewers hot on their ass, and I
Yeah, and the
kind of
Cubs need another
expected them to
star.
be
I
in.
thought Merrill Kelly might be a Cub.
I thought Merrill Kelly, Joe Ryan, say any of those guys. Like the fact that the Dodgers decided to trade Dustin May. Dustin May would have been a great potential addition for them. I think that could actually end up being one of the more underrated trades of this trade deadline. The Cubs, what was happening is everybody wanted Ballesteros, their catching prospect, who's going to be a stud. And the Cubs, they don't have a super deep farm system, but they have Ballesteros, and it seems like everybody wanted him, and they didn't want to give him up. Totally understandable. I wouldn't have given him up either. I think the Cubs may have made the correct decision in that regard, even though some of the fans wanted them to do more.
All right. Well, man, love the breakdown. You got. I know. Follow Moody Mac TV on Twitter. I'm sure there'll be some picks and home run props out here in a minute. And enjoyed the catching up with Todd Fuhrman too. Just the knowledge, dude. I just feel so much more now. I just feel like.
I didn't have any clue about what was going to happen in the AAC or some of these.
Me either. No, but I love getting that knowledge
right.
going into the season. Yeah, just super excited.
Yeah.
As far as weekend stuff goes, dude, Chicago's just popping right now. I mean, summer, Chicago finally got good weather. Lollapalooza started today. Moody, I don't know who any of these people are that are playing at Lollapalooza, dude. I mean,
I
it's
looked
like
at the
Luke
lineup.
Combs today. I know who he is. And but I mean, there's I went through the Lolla band lineup. Like, oh, let me see who's playing. I was like, holy crap, I'm old. I know no one.
Yeah, there's a new generation out. Like obviously, I'm a big EDM fan. I was going to a ton of festivals at one point, and that's somewhat taken over. There was a time when Lala was doing a lot of the electronic shows, and they've kind of stepped back a little bit. They obviously have a few in there this year as well, but there's this new pop generation that's coming up that I don't know any of them or anything about them, to be honest.
I got to ask about the Rufus DeSoul. People are all excited about the Rufus too.
Rufus DeSoul, yeah, definitely will be a good show. They've blown up over the last few years. It's a little bit more, not necessarily my favorite. It's kind of this melodical EDM, trance hybrid type thing. I mean, it's good. Don't get me wrong. They're very good. They've been incredible, but I not necessarily my favorite, but definitely one of the bigger names out right now.
Okay, cool. And then also look at this weekend. There's always a lot of Grateful Dead stuff from like August 1st to 9th because it's like Jerry Garcia's birthday and their last show over the 9th. But there's a bunch of fun Dead stuff this weekend. Garcia's a stream. Dead's got a 3-nighter. Dead Company's play a 3-nighter at Golden Gate Park in San Francisco with like Sturgill Simpson, Trey Anastasia Band, and Billy Strings are the 3 openers. But yeah, they're streaming that over at Garcia's in West Loop. I'm gonna try to get in there Sunday and check that out. And then Martyrs in Chicago's got Terrapin Flyers, like the most well-known Dead cover band around here. They're playing like 5 or 6 shows in the next week. So this is always like a week where I get a little of the Dead kick in. But I'm just looking forward to enjoying this.
I'll leave the show with this. We witnessed today the craziest MLB trade deadline that we have seen in a long ass time.
Yeah, this may be.
I believe that the trade that the Padres made with the A's will be one of the more significant trades in Major League Baseball when we look back in 5 or 6 years. I think the A's 2028, 29, 30, when they've got that entire infield at their peak, going to be absolutely incredible as they head to Vegas. I legitimately believe that the A's won this trade deadline in a way that few teams have in recent memory. Maybe the Nationals whenever they fleeced AJ Preller in that Juan Soto trade. But this was an absolute blockbuster. And I'm telling you now, that is going to be one of the biggest trades for the MLB moving forward. Leo DeVries to the A's to pair with Nick Kurtz and Wilson and that young core that they have. Love it. And shout out to the A's, man. You got to give them credit. They've done a great job flipping and trading and making the most out of the least. And there's a chance now that when they have some money to spend in Las Vegas, they're going to be one of the best teams in Major League Baseball for the 5 or 6 year stretch.
Padres damn sure better do something this year.
They better do something because AJ Preller over the last few years has traded away. Now DeVries, you got James Wood, Mackenzie Gore, Xavier Edwards was the guy that he dealt away at one point. Just name after name after name. He had Max Fried in his system whenever he was elsewhere. Like the list of guys that AJ Preller has traded away over years to essentially have not much in return is really crazy. Preller is either going to go down as one of the worst GMs to ever do it, or a guy that thought outside of the box, disrespected prospects, said FU prospects, and just made deals that he thought was right. And look, Mason Miller, if he becomes a starting pitcher, he could be one of the best pitchers in baseball. So that remains to be seen. But at the moment, I really think the A's won that trade. And it could end up being great for both of them. But I legitimately think that DeVries is going to be an absolute superstar.
All right. Well, love the Moody Major League Baseball trade deadline analysis. Longest Wake Up Mintzy we've had in a long time today, hour and 15 minutes. Shout out Dude Wipes and Stella Blue. And, yeah, man, I hope everybody has a good night. And we'll be back on Tuesday. And life's good, man. Let's enjoy the weekend. Summertime. It's going to be a great summer.